I'm going to be talking to you today about Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. Erik Erikson was a psychoanalyst who was born in Germany and worked under Sigmund Freud. He was best remembered for his well-known psychosocial theories of development. There were 8 stages in this theory, and each stage deals with this idea or this virtue that you have to struggle with. And if you can get past each of those struggles, then you move on to the next step in your development. And these happen over a series of time, usually age related. What stood out to me about this particular Erikson quote was that last sentence, "Do not mistake a child for his symptom." And this is important for educators to understand because children are products of their environment. And oftentimes these are things that we have no control over as educators. They are manifestations of what they are products of. So these behaviors that we're seeing in school, we have to learn how to work with them, and hopefully we can figure out the root of those problems so that we can make some breakthroughs and they can be successful in the classroom and successful individuals outside of the classroom. This particular video is about 15 minutes long, and when you have a chance to look at it, I highly suggest that you do. But basically, what this video talks about is Dr. Burke Harris. She discovered that there was this key factor in the effects of childhood trauma across a lifetime, and basically the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the part of the brain that is the brain's fight or flight response system, becomes overtaxed through persistence the persistent exposure to childhood traumas. And when the system becomes overtaxed, the compounding stress in the body can create larger problems later in life. And why this is affecting teachers is because, again, these stressors at home or these stressors that are created because of their genetic makeup, we have no control over, yet we're seeing these behavior manifestations or these symptoms at school, and we're supposed to learn how to deal with those symptoms so that these children can be successful learners or successful individuals. And we need to keep that in mind when we're working with children that are showing struggles in their lives, and try to figure out what those struggles are and work through that. The first stage of Erikson's psychosocial development theory is trust versus mistrust. The virtue in this particular case is hope, and they struggle with this between infancy and 18 months. The question they're asking themselves is, can I trust the world? If you can trust the world, you become trustful of others. If you can't trust the world, you begin to mistrust others, and you're not able to depend on people, which is key socially going through life. The second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. This usually happens between 18 months to 3 years. The virtue we're looking at is will. We have to ask ourselves, can I do things myself? If you become autonomous, you can have control and independence of yourself and your actions. If not, you become very shameful or doubtful of yourself. You start to feel like you are a failure, and certain feelings come into place and manifest. The next stage between 4 and 5 years is this idea of initiative versus guilt. Your virtue is your purpose. Is it okay for me to do things? If you are successful, you feel like you can. You're motivated to do things. If you're not successful, you start to feel some shame or some guilt. You can be filled with this lack of initiative. The next stage is about 6 to 12 years. It's competence. How can I be good? It's this industry versus inferiority. That's where we get this idea of an inferiority complex. If you are successful, you feel like you can do things. You feel competent in the things that you do. If you're not successful, you start to feel worthlessness. You feel like you are less than others. And sometimes you start to compensate for that feeling of inferiority by doing things that affect you socially. The next stage, stage 5, between 13 and 19 years. This is identity versus role confusion. You're thinking about fidelity. Who am I? If you're successful, you begin to have a strong sense of self. If you're not successful, you start to feel like you don't know who you are. The next stage in young adulthood that you're looking at is this virtue is love, intimacy versus isolation. You start to question, can I love someone and can I be loved? If you're successful, you feel like you can have and you do create these long-lasting relationships and relationships that are filled with love and with intimacy. If you're not successful, you start to develop these feelings of loneliness. You start to feel isolated from others and from society. In middle adulthood, you start to look at your generativity versus your stagnation. The virtue here is care. What can I contribute to the world? If you're successful, you feel like you contribute to society. You feel a sense of accomplishment. In the event that you're not successful, you're looking at stagnation. You feel like you do not feel like you are contributing to the world. You don't feel involved in the world. The last stage in late adulthood is integrity versus despair. Your virtue was wisdom. Was my life a good life? In the event you're successful, you look back at your life and you have a feeling or a sense of satisfaction versus despair. You start to look back at your life with regret, with sorrow, with bitterness. Ultimately, all of these stages of life, you're not going to be dealing with all of them in the classroom, but what you are dealing with is, like Dr. Burke Harris was talking about, the effects of prolonged exposure to childhood trauma does have an effect on you throughout life. And I go back to her because, like she was talking about, that fight or fight response system is designed to save you in the event a bear attacks you in the forest. It's this great analogy. It gets your adrenaline running, your endorphins are pumping, your pupils dilate, your body sense are heightened, and it's a wonderful adaptation for when you see a bear. But for us as teachers, our children, what if they're struggling with this bear every single day? What if that bear is waiting for you at home every single day? And that conflict that they're having to deal with will manifest itself in ways that we can't control in the classroom. And as a teacher, how do we deal with that? The ultimate reality is that as educators, we have to act as more than just teachers. We have to be these conduits of information to other entities involved in this child's life, because a child can't communicate what is really going on with them. We're at the front lines of seeing when a bear attacks, whether it's once in a lifetime occurrence or if it happens every single day. And we're the ones expected to teach children skills that encompass academics, motor function, executive functioning, and more. So when these traumas are happening to these children and they start to manifest themselves in learning disabilities, our duty as educators is to recognize them, to seek appropriate channels for them, to see them, to understand them, and to make sure that the road that lies ahead after us is as bear-free as we can make it. Here are my resources. And thank you so much. I wanted to give a shout out to SlidesGo because they were the template to this slideshow.